Forrest used a term that I don't believe it's his term, but he uses it, which is the notion of truly owned, which is a different way of saying inalienable, which is a different way of saying root or most fundamental aspect of the commons.
Gotcha.
And this is important because if I'm looking for something that cannot be extracted into the complicated, strictly cannot be, like at the geometric level, then I'm looking for the truly owned, the absolutely inalienable.
Okay.
Now, it may not be much, right? I mean, this may be a very, very, small set, but that set is the set from which, the only set that you can be absolutely certain is a set from which you can always reboot a commons. Make sense?
Okay.
Scenario, if I just blow away literally everything else and settle only on this set of the truly inalienable, then I can be absolutely certain I'm working with a clean toolkit.
All right.
And by the way, since we know that the indigenous is a autochthonous emergent process on top of human persons, we should actually reboot something in the mode of the indigenous from that location.
Gotcha.
And as we know, civilization sits on top of the indigenous. We will then arrive back at the point from which we departed. So it may be like, that's the deep code. So what kinds of things are truly owned? And what's funny is Forrest articulated it, one, choice. Not a particular choice, but choice in and of itself. Is
choice in and of itself.
And this made me think of Viktor Frankl. Right? Viktor Frankl, I think, was saying more or less exactly the same thing. It's like, hey, motherfucker, you could put my ass in a seriously bad situation. And as it turns out, here's a set of stuff that you can't take away.
Will to meaning.
No matter what you do, you cannot take this away. And if I sit on that, and I sit in that very specific location, I'm in fact truly free, no matter what you do. And this is the place from which humaning and human persons has the capacity to recohere. I can actually be a person in the concentration camp. The constraints around me are high. I'm still a person.
Okay. That jives completely with the unified theory, by the way. So that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So that was one of the big things. And then you say, okay, well, what is the sacred? Well, the sacred is simultaneously that, right? That set of things that are truly owned are the sacred, and the process by which we operate from that location in relationship with the real. So we can call it sacreding if we want, but the point is it's both a noun and a verb, and it refers to that. And the sphere of the sacred then can grow as we maintain integrity or continuity of that connection. So that which is inside the sphere of the sacred is that which has continuity back down to that which is truly owned through a discontinuous or a continuous process of sacreding.
Beautiful.
And so then commoning is almost in some sense another way of saying sacreding. And it's very careful not to lose that, right? It's and indigenous, right? So if you map, if I take like the word commoning and I think about it from the point of view of like the medieval commoners, but then I say, now let me take indigenous, right? And from the point of view of the indigenous, we actually have a very clean notion of the commons as literally being all of nature, right? And a relationship with that it has its own, like there's a carefulness and responsibility, a sacred relationship with the whole of nature is commoning, right? It's the appropriate. Now, by the time we get to sort of medieval Europe, and we're talking about commoners, we're like, 15,000 years away from that, right? So it makes sense that it's a weird version of that notion, and yet still wasn't dead, right? There still was a vitality to it and a remembering of the necessity of a return to the sacred and the recognition of the, what do they call it? Like, God's green earth, the notion of that at the end of the day, I don't own anything. God owns everything. And I steward it on behalf of God, right? That was a medieval sensibility. And that's not a bad way of doing it, right? In the past, one of the ways that we tried to ground our jubilee at the bottom of the code was to say that all civilization, all complicatedness had as its ground God. God is the superior to or more fundamental than any given human institution, and God said this, right? So this is like the base code. You can't violate it. Now, of course, we've I think discovered that clever monkeys can find a way to game their way around that particular approach. But I think that we can actually be more thoughtful about how we go about doing things, and make sure that the clever monkeys are stewarded into their highest consistently.